In the deep silence between stars, long before the Imperium hardened into dogma and ritual, humanity stood at a fragile moment of becoming. The galaxy was vast, unmeasured, and hostile, yet it lay open before a single unifying will. Across cold voids and forgotten systems, the Emperor of mankind carried the burden of an entire species, guiding it out of isolation and ruin toward order, reason, and dominion. This was the era known as the Great Crusade. Old night had ended, but its scars remained etched into human worlds. Warp storms had cut off planets from one another for millennia, leaving civilizations fractured, regressed, or reshaped by fear and survival. When the storms finally receded, humanity did not emerge as one people, but as countless isolated cultures scattered across the stars. Reunification was not inevitable. It demanded force, vision, and relentless momentum. From Terra, the Emperor launched fleets unlike any seen before. Armored legions of genetically crafted warriors, the Space Marines, advanced at the forefront. They were weapons of conquest, but also symbols of unity. Each legion carried the promise of humanity's rebirth, reclaiming lost worlds and erasing threats that had grown in mankind's long absence. Behind them followed explorers, logisticians, and administrators, laying the foundations of galactic empires still taking shape. At the Emperor's side stood the Primarchs, beings engineered with singular purpose. They were generals, rulers, and instruments of war, each reflecting an aspect of the Emperor's design. Rediscovered across the galaxy, they were reunited with their creator and placed in command of the legions formed from their genetic legacy. Among them were brilliant tacticians, relentless conquerors, and solemn guardians of order. Yet even among these figures, one would come to stand above the rest. Horus Lupercal was found early in the Crusade and raised close to the Emperor. He was shaped not only by war, but by prolonged proximity to imperial authority. He learned governance, diplomacy, and restraint. Where other Primarchs enforced compliance through fear or devastation, Horus often achieved it through understanding and measured force. Worlds brought under his command were not merely conquered, but stabilized. The Emperor observed these qualities carefully. The Great Crusade expanded at an unprecedented scale, and its scope demanded delegation. The Emperor could not remain present on every front, nor oversee every campaign. Command required not only martial excellence, but judgment, loyalty, and the ability to act as the Emperor's will across vast distances. As victories accumulated, the Imperium grew more complex. Supply lines stretched across light years. Newly compliant worlds required governance and integration. Conflicts emerged between Primarchs, born of pride, ideology, and differing interpretations of the Emperor's vision. The Crusade became a vast and delicate mechanism, powerful yet increasingly vulnerable to miscalculation. It was during this period that the Emperor considered elevation. A singular authority was required, one who could command the Primarchs, coordinate the legions, and maintain momentum while the Emperor's attention turned elsewhere. This was not a ceremonial honor, but a necessity born of scale and time. Horus was not without flaws. He possessed ambition, tempered by loyalty. He sought approval, though rarely spoke of it. He carried victory and loss with equal gravity. To the Emperor, these qualities made him reliable. Predictability, in this moment, was not weakness, but stability. Other Primarchs were weighed and set aside. Some were too rigid, others too independent. Some inspired fear more than unity. Horus inspired confidence. His presence steadied campaigns and resolved disputes. When he spoke, others listened, not through command alone, but through trust earned. The decision was delivered without ceremony. Horus was named Warmaster, commander of the Great Crusade, acting voice of the Emperor across the galaxy. The burden placed upon him was immense, though its true weight remained unseen. Across the Imperium, compliance records were sealed, victories archived, and losses absorbed into statistics. Few questioned the pace or direction. Authority became routine, trust reinforced by success. Nothing yet appeared strained. The machinery of conquest moved smoothly, masking every weakness behind progress, discipline, and the belief that unity would endure. In the stillness that followed, the galaxy did not tremble. Fleets moved. Wars continued. Yet history had shifted, setting the Imperium upon a path whose consequences would echo into an age of unending war and sorrow. In the slow drift of fleets between conquered stars, the Imperium entered a quieter phase of expansion. The thunder of first contact faded into routine compliance, and the Great Crusade became a sustained act of administration as much as conquest. Vast armadas moved with measured precision, their courses plotted years in advance, their destinations already measured against the needs of a growing empire. With the title of Warmaster, Horus assumed authority that extended beyond any single legion. His command reached across countless systems, binding together divergent strategies and temperaments. Orders issued in his name carried the implicit weight of the Emperor's will, and with that weight came responsibility unlike any he had known before. The Emperor's withdrawal from the forefront was gradual, almost imperceptible. His presence at councils diminished, his attention increasingly drawn toward Terra and Project Unspoken. To the Imperium at large, this absence was framed as confidence. The Crusade, it was said, had matured beyond constant oversight. Trust had been placed where trust was deserved. Horus accepted this role without public hesitation. Privately, the scale of his task was immense. Each Primarch governed not only warriors, but cultures shaped by their own histories and values. Some embraced Horus's authority readily, recognizing the necessity of unified command. Others complied out of respect for the Emperor alone, viewing the Warmaster as an intermediary rather than a superior. Maintaining cohesion required diplomacy as much as force. Disputes between legions were no longer rare. Competition for honors, resources, and strategic priority intensified as the Crusade pressed deeper into the galaxy. Horus intervened where needed, redistributing forces, delaying campaigns, or granting authority to prevent fracture. These decisions were recorded, justified, and archived, forming the first layers of what will become imperial bureaucracy. Beyond the councils of war, the Crusade itself changed in character. Early campaigns had been driven by urgency, the need to reclaim humanity's lost inheritance. Now, that urgency gave way to consolidation. Worlds were evaluated for compliance, productivity, and stability. Military victories were followed by years of reconstruction and governance, overseen by remembrances, administrators, and expeditionary governors. Horus traveled constantly, appearing at war fronts and negotiation tables alike. His presence reassured some and unsettled others. He was no longer merely a primarch among peers, but a symbol of centralized authority. Each decision reinforced the structure of the Imperium, while quietly reducing the autonomy of those who had once ruled their campaigns without oversight. The Primarchs responded in different ways. Some adapted, aligning their strategies with a broader vision articulated by the Warmaster. Others grew distant, pursuing their conquest of the edges of imperial attention. These divergences were noted, but not yet corrected. Success continued to mask tension, and the Crusade advanced without obvious failure. At the heart of this transition lay an unspoken expectation. Horus was not only to command, but to embody continuity. He was to act as the Emperor's presence in absence, maintaining not just military effectiveness, but ideological coherence. This burden was subtle, undefined, and therefore difficult to measure. Communication from Terra became less frequent, and when they arrived, they were precise and limited. Strategic directives replaced philosophical guidance. The Emperor's vision remained absolute, but its articulation narrowed, leaving interpretation increasingly in the hands of those executing it. For Horus, this distance introduced uncertainty. Decisions once confirmed by immediate council now rested solely upon his judgment. Each order issued carried consequences magnified by scale. Each delay, each miscalculation, propagated across entire sectors. Yet the Crusade did not slow. Fleets advanced. Compliance rates remained high. The Imperium appeared unified, efficient, and unstoppable. Beneath this surface, however, the mechanisms of command had shifted irreversibly. As the Warmaster stood at the center of this vast endeavor, the Imperium adjusted itself around his authority. Roles solidified. Hierarchies formed. Trust became institutional rather than personal. The age of singular leadership gave way to distributed power, balanced precariously upon faith in structure and obedience. This period also saw the refinement of observed loyalty. Compliance was no longer measured solely by victory, but by alignment with imperial doctrine. Cultures that resisted secular authority were corrected or dismantled. Traditions incompatible with centralized rule were erased with administrative finality. These actions were justified as necessary steps towards stability, and they proceeded without overt opposition. Horus sanctioned these measures methodically. Records show restraint where possible and decisive action where required. Each approval bound him more tightly to the Imperium's evolving identity. He became not only executor of policy, but its living standard, reinforcing norms through precedent rather than decree. The Warmaster's influence extended into symbolism. Standards bearing his sigil accompanied expeditionary fleets. His judgments were cited in training halls and strategiums. Slowly, imperceptibly, the idea of authority shifted from a singular emperor to a system that functioned in his absence. Within this system, cracks remained theoretical, not yet realized. Success continued to validate the structure. The Crusade momentum carried all doubts forward, compressing them into silence. What could not be resolved was deferred, catalogued, and buried beneath progress. Thus, as the Imperium expanded under Horus's careful direction, it did so with growing confidence and diminishing introspection, unaware that the foundations of command were already changing in ways that could not be undone. The galaxy remained silent. In the widening span of the Great Crusade, authority continued to diffuse across distance and duty. Horus moved between war zones and councils, carrying reports, judgments, and expectations. The galaxy responded with obedience, yet subtle variants appeared as commanders interpreted orders through personal doctrine. Each translation of intent altered outcomes slightly. These differences were minor, absorbed by success, but they accumulated quietly. Systems complied, fleets advanced, and records showed progress. Beneath that progress, interpretation replaced presence, and interpretation began shaping the Imperium. This transformation unfolded slowly, unnoticed, accepted as necessary efficiency by all observers within imperial hierarchies everywhere at scale. Historical context defined this moment. The Imperium had reached a threshold where expansion strained coherence. Supply, communication, and ideology required alignment across thousands of worlds. The Emperor's vision remained singular, yet its execution depended on layered command. Horus stood at the apex, but beneath him authority fractured into segments. Each segment functioned effectively alone. Together, they formed complexity. Complexity demanded standardization. Standardization demanded enforcement. These necessities reshaped the Crusade from exploration into governance. This shift altered priorities, measurements of success, and the meaning of victory itself for commanders operating far from terror and beyond direct imperial scrutiny for decades unendingly. Key events during this phase were administrative rather than dramatic. Compliance actions multiplied, catalogued through data and decree. Expeditionary fleets enforced uniform law, dissolving local power structures resistant to secular rule. Remembrances recorded triumphs, while archivists refined classification of threats. Horus approved frameworks that prioritized stability over spectacle. Campaigns were delayed to secure governance. Wars ended quietly, through surrender or attrition. Each resolve front-freed resources, reinforcing the system that sustained momentum. Across sectors, these methods normalized obedience and reduced variance between distant commands without immediate reliance on charismatic leadership or direct personal intervention by primarchs in most theaters globally. Important figures adapted unevenly. Several primarchs embraced procedural clarity, aligning legions with Warmaster directives. Others withdrew into autonomous campaigns, maintaining traditions predating unification. Horus mediated disputes, issuing compromises that preserved progress. His authority rested on consensus reinforced by results. Over time, this method reduced open conflict. It also reduced dialogue. Decisions became expected, not debated. The Warmaster's judgment replaced collective deliberation across the Crusade. Such efficiency accelerated outcomes while narrowing perspectives available to imperial leadership. Confidence grew, yet adaptability declined as procedures hardened into assumed correctness. Documented success discouraged reassessment and rewarded adherence above cautious inquiry in command councils everywhere. Consequences emerged gradually. The Imperium functioned smoothly, yet resilience weakened. Systems depended on uninterrupted hierarchy. When uncertainty arose, resolution slowed. Horus compensated through increased oversight, expanding staff and delegation. This expansion diluted personal accountability. Authority became positional, not relational. Loyalty aligned with structure rather than individuals. These changes were logical responses to scale. They also introduced fragility masked by order and discipline. Failures, when they occurred, propagated farther before correction mechanisms engaged. Such delays remained theoretical risks, untested by catastrophe during this phase. Confidence persisted, reinforced by records showing continuous advancement across most Crusade fronts under Warmaster oversight alone still. Calm transitions marked this chapter's close. The Crusade advanced methodically, its rhythm steady and unchallenged. Horus remained central, composed, and effective. The Emperor's absence normalized. Systems trusted process. Fleets trusted orders. Few considered alternatives. In this quiet confidence, foundations settled. What followed would test them. But for now, the Imperium moved forward, certain of its path and unaware of approaching strain. Stars continued to fall into compliance, and the machinery of empire turned without pause. Silence between crises allowed assumptions to harden unexamined. History recorded success, not vulnerability. During this interval across imperial archives awaiting future interpretation and consequence eventually. Within Horus himself, adaptation continued unseen. The Warmaster refined judgment through repetition. Success reinforced methods, and methods shaped expectation. Doubt found little space amid affirmation. Counsel became selective, filtered by efficiency. This inward narrowing was gradual, rational, and unremarked. Command rewarded certainty. The Crusade rewarded speed. Reflection yielded to execution, and execution defined authority within expanding imperial space. Such conditions favored decisiveness while discouraging philosophical inquiry into long-term consequences. Records note competence, discipline, and cohesion across commands. Underlying motivations remain undocumented, assumed stable by default within official analyzers compiled during Crusade expansion and administrative consolidation at scale galaxy-wide. The Imperium thus entered a phase of quiet assumption. Authority appeared settled. Purpose seemed aligned. The Warmaster's role felt permanent. No alarm sounded. No resistance coalesced. Progress continued, measured and recorded. In absence of disruption, trust deepened. This trust would later prove decisive. For now, it sustained momentum, reinforcing belief that structure alone could secure humanity's future. Such belief reflected experience rather than foresight, grounded in uninterrupted success. Warnings, when raised, were deferred pending results. Results continued, validating postponement. Thus the cycle reinforced itself through repetition without immediate contradiction from external events or internal dissent at this time period alone. As Chapter 3 concludes, the galaxy remains still. Expansion persists. Authority consolidates. Horus commands effectively, framed by trust and expectation. The Emperor remains distant, yet influential through design. No singular moment marks change. Instead, continuity prevails. These conditions form the quiet prelude to later fracture. For now, the Imperium rests within order, unaware that stability itself has become a vulnerability. Future chapters will examine how this balance begins to shift under pressure. At present, calm endures, supported by confidence and routine. History pauses here, recording motion without foresight across the expanding Imperium before consequence asserts itself with inevitability in time. Across the boundless void, humanity's resurgence continued under the careful orchestration of the Warmaster. Systems once isolated now contributed to the machinery of the Great Crusade, sending ships, supplies, and knowledge into the interconnected network of the Imperium. Yet as compliance grew, subtle tension accumulated, imperceptible to most but recorded in the meticulous logs of the Emperor's archives. The galaxy's expansion was not unopposed. In pockets of uncharted space, anomalies persisted, residual threats of xenos, rogue human factions, and worlds that resisted integration. These challenges were small individually, yet collectively they hinted at the limits of centralized control, suggesting that the tide of conquest, however steady, was not without resistance. Historically, this period followed years of successful campaigns. The Great Crusade had progressed across thousands of systems, uniting humanity under the banner of the Emperor. Primarchs commanded legions with precision, and fleets moved in harmony across immense distances. The Imperium had achieved what had once seemed impossible, the reintegration of scattered civilizations and consolidation of power under single vision. This was a time of apparent triumph, but the infrastructure control had yet to be truly tested. With expansion, the strain of scale began to emerge, manifesting not in outright failure but in subtle divergences of loyalty, interpretation, and execution among commanders. Key events marked this transitional period. Strategic councils convened across multiple sectors simultaneously, often connected only by encrypted Vox transmissions or dispatched riders traveling vast distances. Horus presided over these councils, offering guidance, resolving disputes, and ensuring that objectives aligned with the Emperor's overarching design. In one instance, a disputed world known for its complex political structure required careful mediation. Local governors resisted integration, citing cultural autonomy, while the assigned legion demanded immediate compliance. Horus's solution was methodical, a phased approach that combined limited military presence with governance oversight, reinforcing order while minimizing disruption. Such decisions, repeated across numerous systems, became hallmarks of his administration, balancing force and diplomacy with calculated precision. Important figures played roles both visible and hidden. Horus's closest advisors, including senior captains and strategic officers, refined operational directives. They ensured that orders were interpreted uniformly across legions, standardizing training, logistics, and engagement protocols. Beyond them, the Emperor observed from Terra, providing guidance through select intermediaries. His influence remained absolute, though increasingly indirect. This distance placed Horus in a position of unprecedented responsibility, a test not only of martial skill but of judgment, patience, and the ability to anticipate consequences across multiple sectors simultaneously. The Primarchs themselves continued to perform admirably, though their independence occasionally strained cohesion, requiring intervention by Horus to maintain alignment with the broader objectives of the Crusade. Consequences of these efforts emerged gradually. Stabilized worlds contributed to production, supply, and recruitment, reinforcing the Crusade's forward momentum. Conflicts were resolved before they escalated, but the methods employed revealed growing reliance on procedure over personal oversight. Patterns emerged, showing that the Imperium's continued success depended less on individual heroics than on institutional consistency. In practical terms, this meant that deviations from established protocols, whether due to ambition, misjudgment, or cultural difference, posed latent risk. These risks were not immediately apparent. They lay dormant within the administrative networks, observable only by those attuned to subtle discrepancies in command execution. Within Horus, the weight of these developments was tangible, though outwardly controlled. He observed the growing complexity with measured attention, noting that even minor variation could cascade into significant consequences if left uncorrected. His approach combined foresight with pragmatic intervention, ensuring that potential disruptions were contained while broader operations continued uninterrupted. Records indicate that he increasingly delegated routine oversight, focusing instead on anomalies, high-stakes negotiations, and the resolution of conflicts that could not be addressed by standardized procedure alone. This delegation further consolidated his authority, reinforcing both perception and reality of Warmaster command across the Imperium. Calm reflection characterized the conclusion of this chapter. The Crusade advanced steadily, yet the Imperium began to resemble a vast and delicate network of interdependent systems, each reliant on trust, procedure, and centralized oversight. Horus's leadership had ensured continuity, yet the growing scale of operations introduced vulnerabilities that were not immediately evident. The galaxy remained outwardly compliant, with fleets moving, legions fighting, and administrators implementing policy, but beneath the apparent stability, subtle tensions accumulated, like clouds forming beyond the horizon. These clouds would not disrupt progress today, nor tomorrow, but their presence marked beginnings of challenges that no single victory could fully resolve. As night falls over distant stars and the stillness of space deepens, the Imperium rests in apparent order. Systems are integrated, conflicts are managed, and the machinery of conquest hums with quiet efficiency. Horus, at the center of this structure, observes and intervenes when necessary, guiding the Crusade with both authority and prudence. In this calm, one perceives the subtle truth of the era. The Imperium's triumphs, though monumental, rely upon continuous vigilance, careful judgment, and the careful balance between command and delegation. The Great Crusade moves forward, steady and unbroken. Yet beneath the surface, the first hints of unseen turbulence begin to gather, shaping the future in ways imperceptible to those who measure only immediate success. The expanse of the Imperium continued to grow under Horus's guidance, its reaches stretching across light years of space. Fleets moved with disciplined precision, worlds were brought into compliance, and legions executed campaigns with universal efficiency. Yet even in this era of apparent order, subtle tests of loyalty began to emerge. Obedience could not be assumed merely because authority had been centralized. Allegiance required reinforcement, monitoring, and occasional correction. Small divergences in interpretation of orders or the prioritization of objectives became the first measures of the Imperium's true resilience, revealing that the foundation of unity rested upon both trust and oversight. Historically, this period followed decades of initial conquest. Many Primarchs had matured in their roles, developing unique approaches to command. Some favored absolute discipline, others relied upon persuasion and example. Horus, as Warmaster, observed all methods with measured attention, consolidating strategies that ensured cohesion while minimizing unnecessary friction. He understood that loyalty was not a static attribute. It required cultivation through experience, recognition, and judicious exercise of authority. The Crusade's progress depended not only on victories, but on the quiet maintenance of confidence in the chain of command. Key events during this era involved disputes between legions, territorial claims, and political negotiations with newly integrated worlds. In one case, a strategically critical system resisted full compliance, citing long-standing governance traditions incompatible with imperial doctrine. Horus intervened directly, balancing the threat of military enforcement against the risk of alienating local populations. He coordinated a measured response, targeted displays of force combined with extensive administrative guidance, gradually aligning local governance with imperial standards. This approach, repeated in multiple sectors, demonstrated that loyalty was maintained through subtle oversight as much as through overt power, and that the Warmaster's judgment was indispensable to sustaining unity across the Imperium. Important figures influenced these outcomes both directly and indirectly. Horus's lieutenants, senior captains, advisory councils, and delegated administrators served as instruments of both observation and enforcement. Each acted under his authority, implementing policies and monitoring adherence. Other Primarchs, observing the exercise of Warmaster judgment, adjusted their own behavior accordingly. Some adopted similar methods of tempered enforcement, while others deferred more responsibility to their lieutenants, trusting the Warmaster's judgment to resolve ambiguities. Even the Emperor, distant on Terra, relied upon these mechanisms to maintain the integrity of the Crusade, trusting Horus to act in accordance with long-term vision and the principles of order and reason that underpin the Imperium's expansion. Consequences of these trials were subtle yet significant. Compliance became more uniform, while deviations, once minor, were gradually corrected before they could escalate. Observers noted increased efficiency in campaigns and a reduction in interlegion friction. At the same time, procedural enforcement grew more prominent, and personal discretion among commanders decreased slightly. This shift strengthened the coherence of the Imperium while simultaneously introducing a latent dependency. The machinery of governance functioned effectively, but only because it was guided continuously by centralized oversight. Without the Warmaster's steady hand, small inconsistencies could propagate, creating vulnerabilities not immediately visible in reports of progress or victory. Within Horus himself, these years reinforced the qualities that had led to his elevation. He exercised judgment consistently, balancing decisive intervention with patience and measured restraint. Each successful resolution of conflict strengthened confidence in his authority, both within the legions and across the administrative hierarchy of the Imperium. Yet the weight of responsibility was unmistakable. Every decision, from the allocation of fleets to the adjudication of disputes, carried implications far beyond the immediate theater. Errors could ripple across systems, affecting production, loyalty, and morale. Horus approached each situation with meticulous calculation, aware that both action and inaction held equal consequence within the vast web of imperial operations. Calm reflection characterizes the close of this chapter. The Imperium appears unified, its machinery functioning efficiently under the careful direction of the Warmaster. Tests of loyalty, though ongoing, are addressed with skill and foresight, maintaining cohesion without disruption. Yet beneath this surface, the reliance on centralized judgment underscores a hidden tension. The structure itself, though effective, depends upon continued vigilance of a single guiding hand. Fleets move, governors govern, and legions follow orders, but the subtle strains of scale and distance suggest that the Imperium's unity is maintained as much by observation and judgment as by the authority it ostensibly enforces. As stars shine silently across the void, the galaxy rests in an ordered pattern, its systems align under Imperial oversight. Horus, standing at the center of this web of command, continues to observe, intervene, and guide, ensuring that loyalty remains steadfast and the crusade progresses without interruption. The machinery hums steadily, but the trials endured during this period foreshadow challenges yet to come, challenges that will test not only authority and obedience, but the very assumptions upon which the Great Crusade has been constructed. In this quiet, measured era, the Imperium functions with efficiency and stability, yet the subtle undercurrents of tension whisper across the distances of space, waiting for time and circumstance to reveal their consequences. In the stillness of the void, far from terror, the Imperium appeared seamless. Fleets glided between worlds with disciplined precision, armies executed campaigns with uniform efficiency, and governors implemented policies without hesitation. Yet beneath the surface of order, subtle currents of tension began to move unseen, like distant eddies in a calm sea. Minor disagreements, differences in interpretation, and localized rivalries began to accumulate. Individually, these incidents were insignificant. Collectively, they formed a pattern that hinted at the growing complexity and fragility inherent in a vast empire governed across light years. Historically, this period followed years of successful integration and conquest. The Great Crusade had brought countless human worlds under centralized rule, and the legions executed directives with unprecedented efficiency. The Emperor's overarching vision remained intact, but his presence was increasingly indirect. Decisions once made in the immediacy of terror were now executed by Horus and his council, filtered through layers of delegation. This shift was necessary, yet it introduced variables that were subtle and difficult to quantify. Authority, while centralized, relied upon interpretation, trust, and the judgment of intermediaries dispersed across multiple sectors. Key events reflected these emergent tensions. In one sector, a warlord defiance of legion oversight threatened to disrupt supply lines critical for campaigns hundreds of light years away. Horus responded by deploying a combination of measured force and administrative oversight, gradually resolving the dispute without open conflict. In another instance, two Primarchs, each commanding neighboring legions, interpreted the Emperor's directives differently regarding a contested world. Horus mediated, balancing operational efficiency against the need to maintain cohesion among the legions. These interventions, though successful, reveal a subtle pattern. As the Imperium expanded, maintaining unity demanded constant vigilance, and even minor misalignments required careful management to prevent cascading consequences. Important figures influenced the outcomes of these challenges in both direct and indirect ways. Horus, as Warmaster, remained the central authority, exercising judgment with methodical precision. His lieutenants and senior officers ensured that orders were applied consistently and that records of compliance were meticulously maintained. The Primarchs, while largely obedient, began to express variations in strategy and approach, reflecting differences in temperament, experience, and perspective. Even the Emperor, observing from terror, relied increasingly upon reports and mediated counsel, trusting the Warmaster's capacity to align the legions with his long-term vision while preserving the stability of the crusade. The consequences of this phase were profound, though subtle. The Imperium continued to function efficiently, yet the reliance on centralized oversight became increasingly apparent. Success masked the underlying dependency. The coherence of campaigns and the uniformity of compliance rested upon the consistent application of judgment by a single individual. Delegation ensured progress, but it also introduced latent fragility. Miscommunication, delayed intervention, or conflicting priorities could have amplified effects across multiple sectors. These risks, largely theoretical at the time, highlighted a tension between operational efficiency and structural resilience, suggesting that the Imperium's apparent stability was conditional rather than absolute. Within Horus, awareness of these dynamics shaped decisions and reinforced patterns of governance. He refined methods of conflict resolution, balancing authority with persuasion and force with diplomacy. Each decision was deliberate, measured, and recorded, contributing to the growing infrastructure of oversight and control that defined the Warmaster's role. At the same time, Horus recognized that procedural adherence could not replace judgment entirely. Rigid compliance without insight risked undermining long-term cohesion. His role, therefore, required both active engagement and strategic foresight, guiding not only outcomes but the framework within which the legions and governors operated. Calm reflection concludes this chapter. The Imperium moves steadily, its machinery functioning with apparent order and reliability. Yet the shadows of discord remind observers that cohesion is not merely inherited through obedience, but maintained through continuous judgment, attention, and a careful balance of power and oversight. The Great Crusade advances, its rhythm steady, its victories numerous, but the subtle undercurrents of rivalry, interpretation, and independence indicate that even in apparent order, challenges lie latent, waiting for the pressures of scale and circumstance to reveal them. As stars glimmer in the void and fleets continue their disciplined movements, the Imperium rests within the structures established by the Warmaster. Order prevails, loyalty appears unwavering, and the machinery of governance hums efficiently. Yet beneath this calm, subtle tensions weave through systems, legions, and councils alike. Horus observes, intervenes, and guides, maintaining alignment with the Emperor's vision while reinforcing stability across countless worlds. In this quiet balance, the Imperium progresses, unchallenged for now, but quietly shadowed by forces of subtle discord whose eventual consequences will shape the future humanity across the stars. Across the silent expanse of the galaxy, the Imperium moved with disciplined precision. Worlds once isolated now function within an intricate network of governance, production, and defense. Fleets patrolled sectors with routine efficiency, and legions executed campaigns as if guided by a single, unwavering will. Yet beneath the surface of order, the weight of responsibility grew ever heavier upon Horus. As Warmaster, he commanded not only armies and fleets but the expectations, loyalty, and future of an entire species. The burden was both immense and inescapable, pressing with quiet persistence that few could perceive. Historically, this period followed decades of consolidation after initial conquests. The Great Crusade had brought humanity to a point of unprecedented unification, yet this achievement relied on constant oversight, measured judgment, and the careful balance of authority. Decisions once made directly by the Emperor were now executed by Horus, filtered through an expanding network of officers, lieutenants, and administrators. With each delegation, the Warmaster's judgment became the linchpin of imperial stability, a fulcrum upon which the effectiveness of campaigns, the loyalty of primarchs, and the coherence of distant systems depended. The magnitude of this responsibility shaped both the strategies employed and the very character of leadership required. Key events during this phase involved decisions that would ripple across entire sectors. In one instance, a contested system presented conflicting claims between two allied governors and the local planetary administration. Horus evaluated intelligence reports, reviewed operational contingencies, and balanced potential consequences before issuing a phased integration strategy. This approach relied upon subtle enforcement, careful negotiation, and precise timing to ensure compliance without provoking rebellion. In another scenario, logistical failures threatened the advance of a key fleet, demanding immediate intervention. Horus coordinated relief efforts across multiple star systems, balancing the needs of war, supply, and stability simultaneously. Each action demonstrated that his decisions carried significance far beyond the immediate theater, shaping outcomes across thousands of worlds. Important figures influenced these events in nuanced ways. Horus's lieutenants and senior officers executed orders with precision, their actions magnified by trust in his judgment. The primarchs, aware of the growing centralization of authority, adjusted their behavior to align with the expectations of the Warmaster while maintaining their own operational autonomy. Even the Emperor, observing from terror, deferred many strategic decisions to Horus, confident in his discernment and ability to act in accordance with long-term objectives. This delegation underscored the uniqueness of Horus's role. He was not merely a commander, but an extension of the Emperor's will, entrusted with the practical realization of a vision spanning countless worlds and centuries. The consequences of this concentration of authority were both practical and subtle. The Imperium functioned efficiently, yet its stability became increasingly dependent upon the continued clarity and consistency of Warmaster judgment. Decisions, once deferred or ambiguous, could propagate instability if unresolved. The careful balance of force, diplomacy, and administration maintained progress, but introduced latent fragility. Should a Warmaster's judgment fail, even momentarily, the ripple effects could reach across sectors, influencing morale, compliance, and logistical cohesion. These risks, largely invisible during periods of uninterrupted success, represented the delicate edge upon which the Imperium balanced. Within Horus, the weight of choice influenced both action and thought. Each decision required assessment of countless variables, including fleet disposition, planetary governance, legion cohesion, and the broader trajectory of the Crusade. He learned to anticipate outcomes not only in immediate terms but in subtle, long-term consequences that might emerge years later. Success reinforced methods of measured intervention, while failures, though few, were catalogued and used to refine judgment further. Through this process, Horus became more than a commander. He became the central axis upon which the operational stability of the Imperium rested. Calm reflection concludes this chapter. The galaxy moves steadily under the direction of the Warmaster. Fleets advance, worlds integrate, and legions execute orders with uniform precision. Yet beneath the surface of apparent harmony, the weight of responsibility presses quietly but unrelentingly. The choices made in these years will shape the course of the Crusade for decades to come, influencing loyalty, compliance, and the structural resilience of humanity's empire. The Imperium appears secure, efficient, and unstoppable, yet its continued success depends upon the clarity, foresight, and judgment of a single individual at the center of its vast machinery. As starlight glimmers across uncharted systems and fleets maintain disciplined formation, Horus continues to act with deliberation, measuring consequences, balancing risk, and guiding the Crusade. Each day reinforces a delicate equilibrium that allows the Imperium to function, yet also reminds that the weight of choice is inescapable. In this quiet, reflective period, the Warmaster embodies both authority and responsibility, sustaining the machinery of empire and preparing, unknowingly, for trials that will challenge not only his leadership, but the very assumptions upon which humanity's unity has been constructed. Across the vast reaches of the Imperium, the Great Crusade advanced with an almost mechanical precision. Fleets moved through the void as though guided by unseen hands, each vessel a testament to humanity's restored dominion. Worlds once fractured by isolation and internecine conflict now adhered to a uniform order, their populations integrated into the growing structure of imperial governance. Despite the outward appearance of harmony, the echoes of past triumphs carried subtle lessons. Victories were not mere milestones, but markers of the increasing complexity and responsibility inherent in ruling an interstellar empire. Historically, this period followed decades of expansion, consolidation, and measured oversight. The Crusade had united countless systems under a single authority, and the legacies of isolation had been replaced by coordinated governance. The Emperor's vision remained the guiding principle, yet its execution increasingly relied upon the judgment of Horus and his council. Centralization had become a necessity. With it, the interpretation of authority, the management of primarchs, and the coordination of fleets all depended upon continuity of command. Every triumph, therefore, carried with it the subtle reinforcement of procedure, expectation, and the precedent of success. Key events of this period were both military and administrative, and their outcomes resonated across multiple sectors. In one campaign, a previously independent human world had resisted integration for decades. Horus orchestrated a precise series of measures combining targeted demonstrations of military capability with carefully staged governance initiatives. The planet's administration eventually aligned with imperial structures, not merely through coercion, but through calculated persuasion and demonstration of long-term benefit. Elsewhere, two legions, operating in adjoining sectors, achieved simultaneous victories over Xeno's forces, coordinated in a manner that reinforced not only strategic objectives, but also the interdependence of command and cooperation between primarchs. Each successful campaign reinforced confidence, both in the Warmaster and in the systems designed to maintain cohesion across the Imperium. Important figures continued to shape these outcomes. Horus remained at the center of decision-making, his presence both direct and symbolic. Senior officers, advisors, and captains executed his orders, while primarchs aligned strategies with his guidance to maintain the unity of the crusade. The emperor, observing from terror, continued to trust Horus implicitly, providing counsel only where necessary. This trust emphasized the centrality of the Warmaster's judgment, the coherence of fleets, the loyalty of legions, and the effective administration of conquered worlds were all mediated through his decisions, and each action served to reinforce his position as a primary executor of imperial vision. The consequences of these achievements were manifold. The Imperium systems functioned with remarkable efficiency, with trade, communication, and governance proceeding largely without interruption. Success, however, created subtle dependencies. The ability of the empire to maintain cohesion increasingly relied upon the consistency and foresight of centralized authority. Procedural adherence, once a supplement to judgment, began to take precedence as campaigns expanded in scale. Latent vulnerabilities emerged in the form of potential miscommunication, delay, or misalignment between sectors, a risk masked by continuous victories and the outward impression of perfect order. Within Horus, this period strengthened both confidence and methodical precision. Each victory reinforced the strategies of oversight, judgment, and balance that had guided his leadership to this point. Subtle patterns of cause and effect became evident, revealing that even minor deviations in execution could ripple across multiple sectors. Horus refined his approach, emphasizing anticipatory action, measured intervention, and the careful calibration of force and diplomacy. These skills, honed over countless campaigns, allowed him to maintain stability across the galaxy, ensuring that successes were not fleeting but embedded within the broader structures of the Imperium. Calm reflection concludes this chapter. The galaxy appears unified and orderly, fleets continue to operate without disruption, and worlds remain aligned with imperial objectives. Yet beneath the surface of triumph, subtle echoes of the challenges faced in earlier campaigns persist. Authority relies upon judgment as much as obedience, cohesion depends upon balance as much as force, and the machinery of governance, though effective, rests upon the foresight and diligence of those who manage it. The successes of the Great Crusade are therefore as much a testament to procedural efficiency as to martial prowess. As the stars shimmer across silent voids and fleets advance along preordained courses, the Imperium rests in the structured confidence established by Horus. Victories are celebrated quietly through reports, records, and the steady reinforcement of order rather than grand spectacle. The echoes of triumph, while soothing in their immediate clarity, serve as a reminder that the stability of the Imperium is neither absolute nor permanent. Each accomplishment strengthens both the empire and the expectations placed upon its leadership, establishing patterns that will influence the unfolding history of humanity across the galaxy in the years to come. Across the galaxy, the Imperium continued its methodical advance, each system falling into alignment under the structures established by the Emperor and executed through the Warmaster. Yet the more extensive the crusade became, the more subtle and interconnected the forces shaping its success grew. Compliance was no longer measured solely through victories on the battlefield. It extended into governance, trade, communication, and culture. Each decision, each policy, each interaction became part of an intricate web, linking distant systems into a single, functional whole. In this web, influence spread quietly, often unseen, yet it determined the character and stability of the entire Imperium. Historically, this period followed decades of consolidation and strategic oversight. The Great Crusade had extended humanity's reach across countless worlds, establishing not only military dominance but also political and administrative cohesion. The Emperor's vision provided clarity of purpose, but its execution relied increasingly on the judgment of Horus and the methods he refined during the earlier stages of command. Legions operated efficiently, fleets moved without delay, and governors executed policy with remarkable uniformity. Yet this surface efficiency masked the intricate dependencies that bound the empire together, dependencies that were rarely visible outside of council chambers and operational reports. Key events during this phase illustrate the growing complexity of influence within the Imperium. On one frontier, a coalition of recently integrated worlds faced resource shortages that threatened both local stability and supply lines for adjacent campaigns. Horus coordinated relief efforts, redistributing materials, adjusting fleet deployments, and overseeing logistical support across multiple sectors. Simultaneously, he directed administrative reforms, standardizing governance structures to reduce future risk. In another instance, rival primarchs, each commanding adjacent legions, required mediation to prevent overlapping campaigns from creating strategic friction. Horus intervened, balancing priorities, assigning responsibilities, and establishing oversight measures to ensure cohesion. These interventions demonstrate that influence extended beyond orders. It encompassed guidance, persuasion, and a subtle alignment of independent actors with overarching objectives. Important figures played crucial roles within this network of influence. Horus remained central, yet the execution of policy depended on the coordination of senior officers, captains, and advisors, each responsible for specific sectors, fleets, or legions. Primarchs, while operating with autonomy, increasingly deferred to the Warmaster on matters of interlegion coordination, resource allocation, and dispute resolution. Even the Emperor, observing from Terra, trusted Horus to maintain cohesion across vast distances, relying upon his judgment to translate singular vision into coordinated action across an empire of unprecedented scale. Together, these actors formed a layered hierarchy in which influence radiated outward, shaping decisions, behavior, and outcomes without overt coercion. The consequences of this period were both practical and structural. Operational efficiency increased, interdependence grew, and systems functioned with remarkable reliability. At the same time, reliance upon centralized oversight intensified. Authority was effective because it was enforced consistently, but the network of interdependencies also introduced subtle vulnerabilities. Miscommunication, delayed intervention, or misaligned judgment had the potential to propagate far beyond the initial point of failure. This latent risk was largely theoretical during this period of uninterrupted success, yet it formed an invisible foundation upon which the continued expansion of the Crusade depended. Within Horus, the awareness of these threads shaped both perception and decision-making. Each directive was considered in terms of its broader impact, with attention given to interactions across multiple systems and legions. Patterns of cause and effect became central to his method of leadership, guiding the allocation of resources, the timing of campaigns, and the resolution of disputes. This approach reinforced stability while fostering an environment in which judgment and foresight remained as essential as martial skill. The Warmaster's role extended beyond immediate command. He became the axis upon which the coherence of the Imperium rested, a central point of influence through which the Empire's countless elements aligned. Calm reflection concludes this chapter. The galaxy moves in structured harmony. Fleets maintain formation, and legions execute campaigns with disciplined precision. Influence, subtle and pervasive, ensures compliance, cohesion, and continuity across vast distances. The successes of the Great Crusade reflect not only martial prowess but also the careful management of relationships, authority, and interdependence. Yet beneath this surface, the complexity of interwoven influence suggests that even small disturbances could ripple outward, affecting multiple sectors, legions, and governors. The Imperium, while appearing stable, is balanced delicately upon the awareness, judgment, and foresight of its central authority. As starlight glimmers across remote systems, fleets advance along their predetermined courses, and worlds continue their integration into the structures of the Imperium. Horus observes, directs, and intervenes as necessary, reinforcing both order and cohesion. The machinery of governance hums with quiet precision, guided by patterns of influence that are felt rather than seen. In this quiet, measured period, the galaxy functions with stability and purpose, yet the latent tension of interdependence hints at challenges that will test the Empire's cohesion in ways subtle and profound, shaping the course of humanity's future across the stars. Across the silent reaches of space, the Imperium continued to expand under the careful orchestration of the Warmaster. Fleets moved in precise formations between worlds, and legions executed campaigns according to plans devised long before their arrival. Planets that had once been isolated, fractured, or in conflict were now integrated into the growing structure of human governance, contributing to supply, recruitment, and stability. Yet beneath the surface of apparent order, the exercise of authority became increasingly complex, requiring subtle calibration, constant observation, and the careful balancing of power among commanders, primarchs, and administrative hierarchies. Historically, this period followed years of consolidation, in which the Great Crusade had expanded humanity's reach across thousands of star systems. The Emperor's vision guided all operations, yet it was executed increasingly through the judgment of Horus. Centralized authority had become a necessity, as fleets, legions, and planetary administrations operated across distances that made direct oversight impossible. Success had created efficiency, but it had also introduced new dependencies. The functioning of the Imperium relied as much on the careful balance of influence and delegation as on the skill of individual commanders. Each decision had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate theater of action. Key events during this phase highlight the need for equilibrium. On one frontier, multiple legions faced overlapping operational mandates, creating the potential for conflict between commanding officers. Horus mediated carefully, reallocating responsibilities, coordinating communication between commanders, and ensuring that objectives were clear and achievable without unnecessary friction. In another instance, a systems governing council resisted the imposition of imperial administrative standards, requiring a combination of enforcement and negotiation. Horus established phased implementation protocols, allowing for gradual adaptation while maintaining compliance. These examples demonstrate that authority was not imposed solely by rank or power, but by measured judgment, foresight, and a consistent application of policy across diverse and distant sectors. Important figures contributed to this balance in both direct and indirect ways. Horus remained central, guiding fleets, legions, and administrative efforts with precision. Senior captains and advisors executed his directives, ensuring that decisions were uniformly applied and that deviations were corrected promptly. Primarchs, while autonomous in local campaigns, increasingly deferred to the Warmaster in matters requiring interlegion coordination, resource allocation, and strategic oversight. Even the Emperor, observing from Terra, relied upon Horus's discernment to maintain coherence across the Imperium, trusting him to act in accordance with long-term objectives while managing the subtle complexities of decentralized authority. The consequences of this careful balance were both practical and structural. Operational efficiency remained high. Campaign proceeded without interruption, and compliance across worlds was largely uniform. Yet reliance on centralized judgment introduced a latent vulnerability. The functioning of the Imperium depended upon the sustained accuracy, foresight, and decisiveness of a single individual. Errors in interpretation or judgment, though rare, could propagate across multiple sectors, affecting supply lines, morale, and interlegion coordination. While these risks were largely theoretical during this period of uninterrupted success, their potential existence underscored the delicate nature of authority exercised at such scale. Within Horus, this period reinforced the need for measured control. Each decision was weighed not only for immediate outcomes, but for long-term implications across the Imperium. Patterns of cause and effect guided his judgment, informing fleet deployments, the timing of campaigns, and the resolution of disputes. He refined methods to maintain equilibrium among Primarchs, ensure loyalty, and prevent conflicts from escalating. This vigilance allowed him to preserve both efficiency and cohesion, ensuring that the machinery of the Crusade moved forward smoothly despite the inherent complexities of managing a galaxy-spanning empire. Calm reflection closes this chapter. The Imperium advances with a rhythm of precision and coordination. Fleets patrol distant systems, legions execute objectives, and worlds continue to integrate into centralized governance. The balance of authority maintained cohesion, enforcing both compliance and stability across vast distances. Yet beneath the surface, the reliance on centralized judgment highlights an underlying tension. The systems function efficiently only because the Warmaster maintains oversight, resolves disputes, and ensures alignment with the Emperor's vision. This delicate balance is both a strength and a subtle vulnerability, shaping the trajectory of the Great Crusade and the future of humanity's empire. As the stars glimmer across silent voids and fleets continue their measured progress, the Imperium remains unified, efficient, and disciplined. Horus observes, intervenes, and guides, ensuring that authority is exercised consistently, disputes are resolved, and the machinery of governance functions with uninterrupted precision. The galaxy rests within order, yet beneath that order lies a quiet knowledge that cohesion depends upon vigilance, judgment, and the careful equilibrium of power, a balance that will continue to define the Crusade and the unfolding history of human civilization across the stars. Across the vast expanse of the galaxy, the Imperium appeared unbroken. Fleets moved along predetermined courses. Fleets reinforced supply lines, and legions executed campaigns with precision and discipline. Planets once fractured by war, isolation, or cultural difference now conformed to a centralized system of governance. Yet beneath this calm surface, subtle current of ambition began to take root. Among the primarchs, within administrative councils, and even in distant governors, the balance of power and the exercise of authority began to create the first faint stirrings of individual desire, self-interest, and rivalry that would later influence the course of the Crusade. Historically, this period followed decades of expansion and consolidation under the careful guidance of Horus as Warmaster. The Great Crusade had established humanity's dominion across thousands of star systems, bringing worlds into compliance, integrating resources, and coordinating fleets across enormous distances. The Emperor's vision remained the guiding principle, yet the practical execution of that vision depended increasingly upon Horus's judgment, discretion, and oversight. Within this environment, opportunity for influence, distinction, and autonomy emerged. The legions were powerful, their primarchs capable of commanding forces rivaling planetary governments. The scale of operations and the relative distance from Terra allowed room for personal ambition to emerge quietly within the structures of obedience and loyalty. Key events during this period reflect the subtle emergence of these ambitions. On one frontier, a recently integrated world offered strategic resources essential to supply multiple campaigns. Two legions, each under a different primarch, competed to oversee its development. Horus intervened, mediating assignments and redistributing oversight to prevent overt conflict, yet the situation highlighted the competitive instincts growing among those entrusted with authority. In another instance, administrative disputes between planetary governors and expeditionary forces revealed varying priorities and differing interpretations of imperial law. Horus exercised measured judgment, balancing immediate operational needs against the potential long-term consequences of allowing independent action, reinforcing the principle that authority required careful oversight to manage ambition without stifling initiative. Important figures influenced these developments in nuanced ways. Horus, central to maintaining cohesion, increasingly needed to exercise both subtle judgment and strategic foresight. His lieutenants, advisors, and senior captains executed directives with diligence, ensuring that a balance of authority and compliance remained intact. Primarchs, while largely loyal, began to assert independence in smaller campaigns, refining tactics, and managing resources according to personal judgment while deferring major strategic decisions to the Warmaster. Even the Emperor, observing from Terra, relied upon Horus to align the ambitions of his sons with the greater objectives of the Crusade, trusting him to guide, correct, and contain aspirations that could otherwise evolve into open rivalry or disruption. The consequences of these subtle seeds of ambition were both immediate and long-term. Operational efficiency remained high, and campaign proceeded with uninterrupted progress. Yet the emergence of personal motives, differing priorities, and competitive instincts introduced latent risks within the structures of command. While discipline and loyalty ensured outward order, the independence of key actors meant that cohesion was never absolute. Small divergences, if left unchecked, had the potential to propagate through the system, creating friction between legions, administrators, and commanders, and introducing unforeseen complications in future campaigns. Within Horus, awareness of these dynamics influenced both his judgment and methods of leadership. He understood that authority required vigilance not only against external threats, but also against the subtle emergence of ambition within the legions themselves. Each decision, from resource allocation to strategic assignment, was measured against potential long-term consequences, balancing the encouragement of initiative with the containment of rivalry. This delicate oversight reinforced the coherence of the Imperium, maintaining order while subtly shaping the behavior and priorities of those entrusted with command across the galaxy. Calm reflection closes this chapter. The Imperium moves forward with apparent unity and precision. Fleets advance, legions execute orders, and worlds integrate seamlessly into centralized governance. Yet beneath this surface, ambition begins to stir, quietly influencing decisions, behaviors, and relationships. Horus observes, directs, and moderates, ensuring that loyalty remains intact and the machinery of the Crusade functions without disruption. The seeds of personal desire, once subtle, will grow in significance over time, shaping the course of history, influencing choices, and defining the future of humanity's empire. As stars shine silently across uncharted sectors and fleets continue their disciplined movements, the Imperium rests within order and stability. Horus remains at the center, guiding, balancing, and ensuring that the latent ambitions of powerful individuals serve the greater objectives of the crusade rather than threaten its cohesion. In this quiet, measured period, the Empire continues to flourish, yet the first whispers of internal tension foreshadow the complex challenges that will arise as the crusade presses ever deeper into the galaxy. Across the unbroken void, the Imperium continued its methodical advance. Fleets navigated the darkness between stars with disciplined precision, transporting armies, supplies, and administrators across countless systems. Planets that had once been isolated or in conflict now functioned within a complex network of governance, contributing to the stability, resource flow, and cohesion of humanity's interstellar empire. Yet beneath this apparent order, the weight of influence, the subtle shaping of outcomes through authority, judgment, and personal relationships, began to exert an increasingly tangible effect upon the crusade. Decisions made in one sector could ripple across thousands of light years, affecting fleets, governors, and legions alike. Historically, this period followed decades of expansion and integration under Horus's stewardship. The Great Crusade had united thousands of human worlds, establishing not only military dominance but also administrative, political, and logistical coherence. The Emperor's vision remained absolute, yet its practical execution relied upon Horus's discernment, judgment, and mediation. Influence, both formal and informal, became a critical component of command. Subtle actions, such as the allocation of resources, reassignment of sectors, or approval of administrative reforms, created precedents that shaped behavior across the Imperium. Every choice carried consequences beyond immediate effect, reinforcing patterns of loyalty, cooperation, and expectation. Key events during this era demonstrate the subtle reach of influence. In one theater, a planetary governor resisted the imposition of standard imperial structures, citing local traditions. Horus intervened through measured correspondence, redirecting fleet deployments to assist in stabilization while allowing the governor limited autonomy. Over months, this combination of oversight and encouragement realigned the system without overt force, illustrating the power of influence in shaping behavior. Simultaneously, the coordination of two neighboring legions required careful mediation. Overlapping responsibilities and differing priorities risked friction. Horus reassigned objectives, redistributed resources, and established shared oversight committees to maintain cohesion, demonstrating that influence could guide outcomes as effectively as direct command. Important figures contributed to this complex web of influence. Horus, as Warmaster, remained the central pivot through which the crusade coherence was maintained. His lieutenants, senior captains, and advisors executed directives precisely, while primarchs increasingly deferred to his judgment on matters requiring interlegion coordination or strategic allocation of resources. Even the Emperor, observing from Terra, relied upon the Warmaster to ensure that the ambitions, interpretations, and actions of powerful individuals aligned with the broader objectives of the crusade. Influence, therefore, was exercised simultaneously through authority, example, and mediation, shaping behavior across vast distances without constant oversight. The consequences of this exercise of influence were profound. Operational efficiency continued to rise as fleets moved, legions fought, and administrators governed with consistency. Yet dependence upon centralized judgment became more pronounced. The stability of the Imperium relied not solely on obedience but on the accurate interpretation and application of authority by those entrusted with command. Subtle misjudgments or delays could propagate through systems, affecting supply compliance or the coordination of campaigns. While largely theoretical during this period, these latent vulnerabilities reflected the delicate architecture upon which the Empire rested. Within Horus, the weight of influence reinforced the importance of foresight and measured action. Each decision was considered not only for immediate effect, but also for long-term ramifications across multiple sectors and legions. Patterns of interaction, precedent, and consequence shaped his leadership, guiding both resource allocation and strategic oversight. The Warmaster's role extended beyond issuing orders. He became the central mediator, aligning ambitions, correcting divergences, and ensuring that authority functioned effectively across an empire that spanned thousands of systems. Calm reflection concludes this chapter. The Imperium continues to advance, unified, disciplined, and efficient. Fleets maintain formation, legions execute campaigns, and worlds integrate into the structures of centralized governance. Influence, subtle and pervasive, ensures cohesion, compliance, and continuity across the vast reaches of space. Yet beneath this apparent calm, the exercise of influence carries inherent weight. The stability of the empire rests upon the consistent judgment, foresight, and discretion of a few key individuals. These foundations, though invisible to the broader population, shape the trajectory of humanity's expansion and the unfolding history of the Great Crusade. As starlight glimmers across remote systems and fleets advance along measured courses, the Imperium rests in functional order. Horus observes, intervenes, and guides, ensuring that influence reinforces stability rather than fostering divergence. The machinery of governance hums quietly, disciplined by careful judgment and sustained authority. In this measured era, the Crusade flourishes, yet the weight of influence foreshadows the subtle challenges, rivalries, and uncertainties that will emerge as the expansion of humanity continues across the stars. Across the vastness of space, the Imperium continued its steady advance. Fleets traversed a void in precise formations, and legions executed campaigns with unwavering discipline. Planets that had once been isolated or divided by internal conflict now adhered to imperial governance, contributing to supply, recruitment, and logistical stability. Yet beneath this appearance of order, subtle fractures began to emerge. These were not sudden or violent ruptures, but quiet divergences in interpretation, loyalty, and execution. Small differences in judgment, unaddressed disputes, or overlooked rivalries quietly accumulated, forming the first visible hints of structural tension within the galaxy-spanning empire. Historically, this period followed decades of expansion under Horus's vigilant oversight. The Great Crusade had achieved remarkable success, uniting countless human worlds under centralized authority. The Emperor's vision remained a guiding principle, yet its implementation relied increasingly upon Horus's judgment, as distance and scale made direct oversight from terror impossible. While obedience was enforced through procedure, authority extended beyond rules into the realm of interpretation, discretion, and trust. It was here, within the subtle interplay of autonomy and centralized control, that small fractures began to appear, almost imperceptible yet capable of influencing outcomes far beyond their immediate context. Key events illustrate these quiet fractures. On a frontier world, a governor interpreted imperial policy in a manner slightly divergent from the directives of a visiting legion. The discrepancy initially seemed inconsequential, yet it affected supply allocation, fleet coordination, and local morale. Horus intervened, issuing guidance that realigned the system without conflict, demonstrating that fractures, though minor, required careful attention to prevent escalation. In another instance, two Primarchs operating in adjoining sectors pursued slightly differing interpretations of engagement strategy against Xeno's forces. Coordination was maintained through Horus's mediation, yet the incident revealed the growing necessity of continuous oversight to manage independent judgment among the Empire's most powerful commanders. Important figures played a role in both creating and mitigating these fractures. Horus remained central, balancing authority, judgment, and mediation across the Imperium. His lieutenants and advisors executed his directives, monitoring adherence and correcting deviations. Primarchs, while largely obedient, exhibited subtle assertions of autonomy, each influenced by experience, temperament, and ambition. Even the Emperor, observing from terror, relied upon Horus to interpret and guide the actions of his sons, trusting that centralized oversight would maintain cohesion despite minor divergences. These quiet tensions, while contained, serve as reminders that the Imperium's apparent order depended on constant vigilance. The consequences of these fractures were latent but significant. Operational efficiency remained high, and campaigns continued without visible disruption. Yet reliance upon centralized oversight and judgment increased. Minor discrepancies, if left unchecked, could propagate into larger conflicts, affecting fleet coordination, resource distribution, and strategic adherence. The Imperium's stability, therefore, was not inherent but maintained through continuous intervention, careful observation, and the careful calibration of authority. These fractures, though subtle, foreshadowed challenges that could test the resilience of the Empire in ways that victories alone could not mitigate. Within Horus, awareness of these quiet fractures shaped both strategy and leadership. Each intervention, whether diplomatic, administrative, or military, was executed with measured judgment to correct deviations without undermining initiative. patterns of behavior, precedent, and consequence-guided decisions, allowing him to anticipate potential disruptions before they escalated. This vigilance preserved cohesion while permitting a degree of autonomy necessary for legions and governors to operate effectively across vast distances. The Warmaster's role thus evolved into that of both commander and moderator, ensuring that the structures of authority remained intact despite subtle pressures that might otherwise erode them. Calm reflection concludes this chapter. The Imperium advances with precision and discipline. Fleets continue to patrol distant systems, legions execute campaigns with remarkable efficiency, and worlds integrate into centralized governance structures. Yet beneath this surface of apparent unity, quiet fractures persist. Minor divergences in judgment, interpretation, or ambition hint at vulnerabilities inherent in an empire of such scale. Horus observes, guides, and intervenes, sustaining cohesion while mitigating the subtle tensions that threaten to grow over time. The machinery of the crusade hums efficiently, yet the quiet fractures remind all who study the records that stability, though maintained, is neither absolute nor permanent. As starlight illuminates remote sectors and fleets continue their disciplined progression, the Imperium rests in structured order. Horus maintains vigilance, aligning actions, balancing autonomy, and correcting deviations before they grow. The galaxy remains outwardly unified, yet the first hints of structural strain whisper across distant worlds and sectors. In this quiet, measured era, the crusade flourishes. Yet beneath the surface, the seeds of tension suggest challenges that will shape the destiny of humanity across the stars, influencing both leadership and loyalty in the periods yet to come. Across the boundless void, the Imperium continued its expansion with a measured, disciplined rhythm. Fleets moved steadily between star systems, their passage marked by precision and the quiet hum of vast engines, while legions executed campaigns in strict accordance with directives. Worlds once isolated or fractured by conflict now integrated into the growing structures of imperial governance. Yet beneath the apparent stability, the shadows of responsibility and subtle tension stretched long. These were the hidden burdens of command, the weight carried by those at the center of a galaxy-spanning empire, where every choice could ripple across countless systems with unforeseen consequence. Historically, this period followed decades of successful campaigns under the watchful stewardship of Horus. The Great Crusade had brought millions of human worlds into compliance, and the Emperor's vision guided every operation, though its practical implementation increasingly relied upon the Warmaster. Authority had become both extensive and delicate, spanning star systems and legions, governors and administrators, fleets and fortresses. Each operational decision, each administrative directive, each strategic judgment had far-reaching implications, not only for immediate campaigns but for the cohesion, stability, and loyalty of the Imperium as a whole. The shadows of these responsibilities weighed quietly upon the Warmaster, an ever-present awareness of the potential consequences of even the smallest misstep. Key events during this era illustrate the growing gravity of command. In one theater, a strategically vital system faced civil unrest, resource shortages, and the subtle influence of rival factions. Horus intervened with a combination of military presence, diplomatic oversight, and the reassignment of administrative officers, gradually stabilizing the system while minimizing disruption to ongoing campaigns. In another instance, two neighboring legions required careful coordination after overlapping objectives threatened to strain logistics and morale. The Warmaster mediated, adjusted assignments, and established oversight measures that preserved cohesion while allowing each primarch to retain operational autonomy. These events demonstrate that the exercise of authority was not merely an act of command, but a careful balance of judgment, foresight, and quiet shaping of outcomes across multiple layers of responsibility. Important figures contributed to this balance in nuanced ways. Horus remained at the center, the axis of cohesion and the arbiter of strategic decisions. His senior officers, advisors, and captains executed directives with precision, reinforcing the consistency of authority across distant sectors. Primarchs, while capable and largely loyal, increasingly deferred to the Warmaster on matters of coordination, resource allocation, and conflict resolution. Even the Emperor, observing from terror, relied upon Horus to maintain order and alignment, trusting his judgment to reconcile competing priorities and to shape behavior in accordance with the vision of the Crusade. Influence, authority, and oversight blended together into a quiet framework that allowed the Imperium to function across incomprehensible distances. The consequences of this period were both subtle and profound. Operational efficiency remained high. Fleets moved, legions fought, and planets integrated into the structures of the Imperium without visible disruption. Yet reliance on centralized oversight intensified. Stability was maintained not only through obedience but through continuous monitoring, judgment, and intervention. The latent fragility inherent in a galaxy-spanning empire persisted. Minor misjudgments, delayed actions, or overlooked tension could propagate far beyond their point of origin, influencing supply, morale, and cohesion. The machinery of the Crusade operated smoothly, yet its continued success relied upon the sustained attention and foresight of those entrusted with authority. Within Horus, the weight of these shadows shaped every decision. Each choice was measured not only for immediate effect but for long-term implications across multiple systems and legions. The Warmaster's method combined foresight, deliberation, and careful calibration, ensuring that both initiative and loyalty were preserved while latent tensions were mitigated. Patterns of precedent and consequence guided every intervention, reinforcing the structures of authority that allowed the Imperium to function efficiently. In this way, the Warmaster carried not only the burden of victory but the silent responsibility for the cohesion, stability, and ultimate endurance of humanity's empire. Calm reflection concludes this chapter. The Imperium progresses steadily, its fleets disciplined, legions organized, and worlds aligned with central governance. Yet beneath this apparent harmony, the weight of unseen responsibility stretches across space, touching every decision, every campaign, and every planetary administration. Horus observes, intervenes, and guides, maintaining order and coherence while managing the subtle, latent tensions that accompany leadership on such an immense scale. The Crusade advances without interruption, yet the shadows of responsibility remain, quiet but persistent, shaping the decisions, judgments, and foresight that will determine the future of humanity across the stars. As the stars glimmer across the void and fleets continue their silent, disciplined journeys, the Imperium rests in structured order. Horus sustains the equilibrium of authority, ensures cohesion across distant systems, and mitigates the unseen pressures that threaten to unravel even the most disciplined campaigns. In this quiet period, the machinery of the Crusade hums efficiently, yet the shadows of responsibility remain, marking the boundary between stability and the unknown challenges that await humanity as it moves ever deeper into the galaxy. Across the infinite expanse of the galaxy, the Imperium continued its measured advance, its fleets cutting silently through the void, and its legions executing campaigns with disciplined precision. Worlds once divided, isolated, or fractured now function within the vast structures of imperial governance. Yet in this calm, in the apparent perfection of order, the culmination of Horus's influence became increasingly visible. His authority, judgment, and oversight had guided the Great Crusade for decades, shaping both the conduct of war and the alignment of entire civilizations. In this period, the figure of the Warmaster, elevated above all others, became central not only to the execution of imperial will but to the subtle architecture of power that defined the destiny of humanity.